So I will actually talk into the microphone. That will probably help. Okay. So first up today we have Candice, Lorrae. And Candice is an established First Nations singer, songwriter, producer, originally from Darwin, then Perth, and now Melbourne. Candice is one half of the successful pop duo The Marindas, and her musical collaborator, difficult word that, Crystal Kickett. They released their album We Sing Until Sunrise in 2020. Their music combines R&B and soul, various genres of electronic dance, and their lyrics combine English and Noongar language. They've performed in support of Craig David, Yothu Yindi, Jessica Mauboy, to name a few. They won a WAM Award, which is Western Australian Music Award, in 2014. Candice runs her own studio, Candy Suite. It's a First Nations female-led writing and recording studio in Melbourne. There's so much more to hear and learn about Candice today in this session, but also in the workshops. So can we make Candice welcome? All of these people have done so much. That's my edited down introduction. So next we have Nicky Bomba. Nicky's collaborated with musicians from many musical backgrounds and cultures, playing a diverse range of reggae, funk, jazz and ska. His bands include Bomba, Bustamento, and he won an APRA Award for most performed jazz work in 1998 with his band Banana Oil. Do all your bands start with B? No. Well, he did. Nicky had a band in the 90s called The Truth, so that's not a big word. Nicky is the force behind the Melbourne Ska Orchestra, which many of you may have seen, and I saw at a festival, Queenscliff Festival, a few years back. He was drummer for the John Butler Trio, and also drummer with for a short time with Ross Hannaford of Daddy Cool fame. He's worked closely with Joe Camilleri of the Black Sorrows, running a label called the Transmitter label. Won ARIA Awards, Age Music Awards, Music Victoria Awards. Nicky's just completed a solo tour of Australia, getting out and about again after COVID and lockdowns. And if you see Nicky live, you'll notice his energetic rapport with the audience and his ability to create a sense of unity. So I'm sure he's going to bring that today too in this interview and also in the workshops this afternoon. So let's welcome Nicky. Next to Nicky we have Eliza Hull. And Eliza is a musician, writer, producer, journalist, theatre director and disability advocate. She's produced several EPs as well as an album called The Bones of Us, which was released in 2015, and a new release scheduled for later this year. Eliza's music is, I think anyway, very cinematic with lush keyboards and layered vocals, atmospheric vocals. But Eliza's also written music for TV, Teen Wolf, Awkward, Saving Hope, The Heights. If you've seen any of those shows, you'll have heard Eliza's music there. She's produced podcasts, written books, produced TV shows, most notably We've Got This, which is an 8-part series about parenting with a disability, and also Something's Changed for the ABC, which is about having a disability as a child. So recently, Eliza created Accessible All Areas as part of the Isolate Festival, which was an online festival, and which included artists from around the world. She's also an access consultant for live music venues and organisations to help create access and inclusion plans for performers and audiences with disabilities. She's played amazing venues such as the Natural History Museum in London and Central Park in New York. But you can catch her on July 22nd at the Bridge Hotel in her hometown of Castlemaine. And then again on September 3rd here in Bendigo at the White Night Festival. So please welcome Eliza. And finally, we're nearly through the intros. Finally, we've got Jan Skubiszewski, who's a record producer, film and TV composer. He runs Red Moon Studios, which is just down the road in Gisborne South, if any of you have checked that out before. He writes for film and TV, including shows like Brand New Day, Halifax, Serangoon Road, Nolan, Little J and Big Cuz. And he co-wrote the score for Two Hands with his father, Cesare, who's a famous film writer in his own right. Jan's solo work is under the title Way of the Eagle, and his releases have garnered strong Triple J airplay with songs like Rattlesnake and Shadows, and he collaborates on a lot of those songs. We're going to ask him about that later on. He's produced albums in his studio, in other studios perhaps, for John Butler Trio, Dan Sultan, The Cat Empire, Illy, Jackson, which is a band he's also in, Gang of Youths, AB Original, Meg Mac, and many, many more. He's also engineered an album for legendary producer Mark Ronson. So the strength of his production work alone is something would be great to hear about today in the sessions this afternoon. So please welcome Jan. It's your turn, everyone, to have a chat. So the first thing I wanted to touch on is, we've been through 2 years of the pandemic and lockdowns, and we know the effect that it's had on the music industry in terms of the people's ability to earn and to connect with other artists and writers. But I wanted to ask each of you, what was that period like for yourselves in terms of creating work? I know myself as a writer, I found it very productive because I was pretty much had nowhere to go. I was stuck at home and I did a lot of work. So I'm wondering, what was your process during that time? Perhaps tell us the negatives, but also the pros if there were any. Maybe we'll start with you, Candice. Yeah.
No worries. At the time, we were currently on tour, a national tour, and it was our first tour that we've been planning for like 2 years with our album release with the Marindas. And it was kind of scary because that time we were getting the ticket sales that we needed to survive on this tour because people were getting scared, they don't want to go out, COVID's coming. So it was kind of relief that when COVID hit, we stopped the tour and we could put money back into our pockets, not spend it on the tour. So it was kind of a relief for us, I guess. And at the time, it gave me the opportunity to work on my production skills and hone in more at my home and access funding because Victoria was so generous in offering funding to artists that were struggling at the time. So I built a home studio and I became a producer because it's something that I've been sort of tinkering in over the years as an artist, having to learn to write my own songs, but also know how to record and how the other instruments work in music. And so it was very like demo form at the beginning, but COVID sort of gave me that time to be at home and YouTube everything. I had my own college of Candice and just, work on my own studio, and I got onto Nice and started my own business. And now I have a home-based studio called Candy Suite, and it's just the start really. So it's kind of opened up, not as an artist, but to kind of go down that road and have other artists come to me, emerging artists, to help them with their music. So, yeah.
Fantastic. And did you find that you wrote a lot of stuff in the studio, or was it just a process of setting up that studio?
I did. We with the Marindas. So I wrote a single and produced our second EP and working on probably 30 different tracks with 16 different artists right now. So yeah, it's definitely keeping me busy.
Fantastic. And Nicky, how about you in the last couple of years? How was
I had a great time. I actually really enjoyed it. A lot of people say introverts, really love the time to settle in. Wrote an album. I wrote my first book. My father passed away during that time, and so it was an opportunity for us to actually the whole family, we've got 6 children, we were all, first time in 42 years, we were in the same, on the same roof together. Wouldn't have happened if COVID, didn't happen. And there was kind of a blessing, kind of appreciation for the fact that we could still, survive and put food in the fridge and take care of our dad, So it was a really kind of quite emotional, but yet really empowering because when you're father of 6 children, and Maltese pioneer comes to Australia with 4 kids and then has another 2 here and everything and builds up, that's quite a huge thing. We always thought about what would happen when Dad would pass away, so that kind of inspired a lot of things musically and lyrically and that type of thing. So, and I live in a place called Bright, which is so if there's ever a place where you need to kind of camp down for a while, it was just gorgeous. It was surrounded by nature and hills, and could go for bike rides and walks and actually since then I've got a whole new appreciation for just kind of staying home. I've got a studio at home. I've always had my home studio. I found that was one of the first things I did. When I got like in the early days, a lot of studios and engineers just didn't work out. It was kind of letting me down, or they didn't turn up, and I thought I'm just going to learn how to do this by myself. So I've always had my own home studio, and where I live now is kind of like the ultimate studio that I'd always kind of wanted. So I didn't really have to go anywhere else to record, and so as far as recording the album was concerned, my first album that I was going to record like in 2008 was called Food and Shelter, and then I ended up recording an album and calling it Planet Juice. So I still had Food and Shelter as a title. So the title I brought over into this year, into the COVID time, because it was exactly that. I had food and I had shelter, and the food was kind of creativity and music. So it all kind of made sense, and it was all, it was quite easy to kind of, it's kind of like when you're doing a series of paintings or you're writing a story, there's something to hang it on. Or even a song, you've got a song to kind of hang it on, and my father's, passing away, and there was lots of things. So I just wrote a lot, just journaled every day, and from those journals, just gold bits that just came out. They're just like, it was quite easy. And what I've found is that I wanted to work quickly, so I've got a fully fledged Neve console with Pro Tools and all the bells and whistles, and then I got GarageBand on this computer that I'd bought. Because I also did a TV show at the time. I wanted to do a TV pilot. I did this whole thing, like a whole Dave Letterman, Jimmy Fallon type of thing, but it was about drumming. It was like, drum time and drumming jokes and everything. It wasn't very good, but it was great to, set up the cameras and pretend I was, a TV presenter for a while, And so that was a whole learning process. So recording the album, and I just wanted to put ideas down, and so this GarageBand, the brand new GarageBand, that just came with this computer that I bought. It was like a really quick way of kind of putting down stuff. I thought, because the idea of doing things quickly is important for me, and I found, okay, cool. I had one Neumann microphone, was the main microphone, and so if I ever wanted to record something acoustically, I'd literally put over the drum kit one microphone, strategically positioned, and that was my drum track. And it was like, it was raw and everything, but mixed in with all the other stuff that was, a couple of simulators and everything. It's like, I'm just going to play this to my engineer that I normally use. I'm just not going to say how I record it and let him say good or bad. And he went, wow, this sounds great. I said, how'd you do that? I said, I'm not telling you how I did that, So does it sound good? Good, okay, And so it was 4 or 5 of the songs off the new album were just totally on GarageBand. But it just shows, it still records at the same bit rate and everything. It's just like, and if you can manipulate it, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how you do it, whatever's coming out of the speakers or headphones, if it sounds cool, who cares? That's always been my, But also, I love using the getting engineering and doing a proper recording where you get a band in and record, not having to be the engineer as well. So putting the album together was really cool, and I took it to ABC, and they funded it. You know, they because I already got a deal with the Melbourne Sky Orchestra with them, and then writing a book. I mean, because I keep a journal, and I, you know, do poetry and write lyrics and little quirky things, and there's lots of stories that I've had. So I kind of thought I'll just put it to, you know, and so my daughter, who's in New York, she's really good at putting stuff together, and she's done books before, and she'd written a book with my granddaughter, and just a kid's book, and so I just kind of gave all the stuff to her, and she said, you know, that's shit, what are you doing, you know, oh, that's good, okay, no, let's change it around, okay, no, not using that font, no, you know, so she was great with, as a, and so, and the reason I did the book is that, and the book's called Food and Shelter as well, because people didn't buy CDs, so when I released the album, it was vinyl, streaming, and this book. And the book didn't have any lyrics on it because you can get all the lyrics are online anyway. You just go to Spotify and all the lyrics are there. So it was kind of a storybook, but you got a free download. So it's a bit like, you know, like, yeah, pretend you're buying a CD, but you're actually getting a book, you know. So, and then made little drumstick pencils and everything. And so the big thing though that from all of that was that, and thankfully I'd come into the point when COVID hit was about change, about adapting, and you welcome change. And I think the big stumbling block with a lot of things, whether it be relationships, you know, working, recording, writing, creativity, is being scared of change. And it was at the point in my life where it was really about embracing change. So if something happens, it's like, there's the Confucius thing that says, you know, life can change with the swish of a horse's tail, you know. And it was very true. It was kind of like, okay, I just need to adapt. And that became an enjoyment. Like, how do okay, so I can't play live anymore, so I can do this and do that, you know, and just somehow adapt, you know. And apart from, it was great that we actually were able to get money too, which is not a place around the world. You didn't have that privilege of still being able to put food in the fridge, you know. And then now that COVID's finished, the value of playing live, and how that ancient tradition of actually being with people and connecting, and like that's now twice as important for me now. So it doesn't matter what gig I'm doing, there's a real kind of sense of that I'm like a bit like, you know, we're all the musicians of the village, or we've got the stories to tell, and we can tell them well, and we can create a sense of unity, create a sense of community, because that's kind of the essence of music in the first place. It was why it was there in the first place, was to create this sense of, here's a song about us, you know, folk songs. Here's a song about going off to war. Here's a song about returning from war, a wedding, and you know, it's all about that community thing. And I realised that that's what I do well, and celebrating that. You know, I'm not the kind of the singer-songwriter that plays songs that are quite melancholy and like, listen to my songs. I can do those type of things, and I do, and as part of the songwriting process, but it's really about kind of finding out who I was. And that's really what that period did for me. It really kind of defined a lot of things, reset what the normal was, and the change. It's okay. Change is okay. Welcome change. Yeah.
We're sorry to hear about your dad during that time.
You know, we're all going to die.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
and actually that's a big thing. That's been my big thing lately. I've been saying to my children and everything. I just saw my son in Malta, and it's like it's actually a real strong thing to say. You know, that we are all going to die, and so you know, and we're having this existence, this awareness right now, which is like, I believe we're all eternal energies having a human experience, and it's a blink. It goes like that. And so, what are you going to do with your blink? What are you going to do with your life? You know, so it really kind of steps me up. So, you know, that type of vibe, you know. And so Dad passing away was like, yeah, well, you know, that's going to be my transition. You know, what's his legacy? You know, what's my legacy? What am I saying? What's my message? What's my frequency? You know, so it really kind of fine-tuned all that for me, you know. So, you know, yay for life, but we're all going to die.
Yeah. Thank you. And, it sounds like you were incredibly busy the last 2 years, which is fantastic. And Eliza, how about yourself? Notice you're doing lots of things in lots of different areas. And what did that mean for you in terms of music and songwriting, I guess?
Yeah, I feel like similar. At the beginning, it was like anxiety provoking, I guess, because it was like, whoa, the world is suddenly changing. What does that look like for all of us in every way? And so I think that for a moment there, it really frightened me. And I guess, you know, the wider world worries that come with a pandemic, but also that really feeling inside in our home. I had a baby. That was the first thing that happened as soon as the pandemic hit. I had a baby. Then I was, you know, I had a show that was already booked, and that was at the Sydney Opera House, and I was so excited to play there, and that got cancelled, postponed, finally just played that third time lucky. And that was kind of a repetitive thing of cancelling, having a show booked, postponing it, cancelling it, you know, just constantly rescheduling everything. But luckily I did, I guess, you know, go into other different spaces. So I wrote a book. It was an anthology of the experiences of parents with a disability. I have a disability. I have a physical disability. And that was a big dream of mine. I also wrote a children's book that authentically represents people with disability in their homes for young people. And I guess I also just learnt ways to adapt in terms of songwriting. So lots of Zoom sessions as well, which I never thought that I could write a song like that remotely with somebody. You know, I wrote one with somebody on the other side of the world, and also wrote one with an opera session with someone in Australia. And yeah, like that actually worked out really well. And we had times where we were on the computer, you know, looking at each other, creating the song, and times where we'd turn the camera off and have moments where we'd just write on our own and then come back. And yeah, actually came out with some really, really good songs. So that was really incredible. And I guess also adapting in that I thought that I was going to make a record I'd always really wanted to make a record with a great producer, John Castle. And that was all planned to go ahead. And then, yeah, it just didn't happen because of the pandemic. And so he's moved to Tasmania. But now I'm working with another great producer, Pip Norman, and Odette, so Georgia Sally Banks. And it's kind of, you know, really, really working. So in a way I feel like, actually it's not kind of working, it's really working. So I think it's just that adapting and that flexibility and realising that, yeah, it hasn't gone exactly to plan, but that's okay. And I really believe that things are meant to happen the way they do. And so, yeah, it was both hard in terms of live shows cancelling and postponing and that kind of income stream going, but also learning that as a musician there are other ways to hone your creative skills in new and interesting ways, like online. And so yeah, both good and bad.
It's incredible to hear just how much you've all been doing in the last 2 years. I was going to ask about the Zoom sessions, and it was something that AMCOS offered up in the last couple of years. Did anyone here undertake any of those Zoom sessions online, the songwriting, co-writing sessions? No one, yeah. Okay. Eliza did, and it was a great experience. I'm sure there were people out there who did. Oh, okay. All right, that's it then. And Jan, how about yourself? You run a professional studio. What was the lockdowns and pandemic like in terms of that, and surviving from that, I suppose, and also your own work as a writer and producer? What was happening in your world down in Gisborne there?
So I think it was, I probably didn't have quite the time of awakening that some of you guys have. I think it kind of coupled with a time of probably personal, what I was kind of struggling with myself as a creative, and then the pandemic came, and I was already in a state of mind of, just to be really frank, of really questioning if this is something that I wanted to keep doing. I'd managed to build a career that I was really proud of, and I'd always had a lot of momentum. And I think I thrive on that momentum, but I think that momentum also sometimes stops you contemplating what's really going on and where you are really emotionally as a person. And so for me, I was already feeling quite vulnerable. And then when everything happened and I had bands booked to come from interstate, and our studios always had a lot of people from all over the place come. So that was obviously all on hold, and I kind of felt like the road runner who went off the cliff and my feet were still moving, and then there was a crash. And I went down and I felt really, really flat actually. But then, not so much creatively, but I've got 2 young children. Anyone here who got to do the joys of homeschooling? But that was awesome. I mean, I spoke to a bunch of friends who were in bands and do similar work that I do. And we started to say, hey, this is okay. Like, we don't have to, I'd meet people and they'd say, how's your opus coming along? I'm like, fuck, dude, I don't want to write anything about this time. I don't want anything to do with it. And so I wasn't writing, but I was, we were so busy all the time. And then just to have this opportunity to be with my children and my wife, and it's like the love that exploded in our household really did fuel me and make me very inspired. And then it also, over that time, I really started to unpack why I'd hit the low that I'd hit, and also why I was questioning the things that I felt, why I felt angry about it. And I realized that there was a sense of entitlement behind that, and that I'd maybe taken for granted just how special my journey as a musician had been, or as an artist or a creative, or somebody who gets to help other creatives. And that is probably the most beautiful thing that came out of it. I turned off my computers, because every studio's got one, and I turned off the computers and I just sat with my guitar, and every day I would just say, okay, for an hour or 2, I'm just going to play. I don't need to write. I'm going to practice. Today's going to be arpeggios. Today's going to be going over scales. And I just started to see this little journey of getting better and better and better at my craft. And this little spark started to light up inside me again. And over the year and a half or 2 years we did it, I felt like my playing got so much better, and that was the inspiration. And so now when things opened up, I was just so hungry to be able to implement those new ideas into the work that I'm doing. And it gave me a renewed respect and kind of adoration for my peers who I get to work with as a producer. Anytime that somebody says, hey, could you be part of my project? Could you assist me or steer the ship? I think it reinstilled that sense of honor that's in that. And so now I feel like maybe like a little bit more of a vulnerable version of myself, but a lot more honest version of myself. And I'm really enjoying the process again. So yeah, that's it. Not as quite as shiny, but that's the raw truth.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Jan. Thanks for sharing that. I think, and sorry to hear about the lows you experienced, but I think what comes out with each of you is the work ethic as creators and writers and performers, and that sort of continues, and even just that, in your room practicing scales and things like that, and being disciplined enough to sort of do that and get back to that. So I want to talk now about the process of writing, and before we do that, I just want to go back and find out a little bit about how it all started for you all in terms of music and songwriting and creating. Like, for me, I was the youngest in my family, and my elder brothers and sisters in the late 60s had Beatles, Rolling Stones, the Kinks, and they would play them all the time. And for them, it was just, kids with Spotify now listening to music. But for me, I knew at that time when I heard that music, and I would grab my tennis racket or whatever it was and mime to them and pretend I was them. It sparked in something for me that I wanted to be a musician and a writer, and it was because of the influence of my siblings. They didn't realise that they're not musical at all. No, I don't know where I get it from. I don't know where it comes from. But anyway, what I wanted to ask each of you is, at what point did you realise that this was going to be your life, music? And Candice, I read somewhere where you found a Whitney Houston cassette on the side of the road, and that was and from listening to that became a massive influence. Was that the start, or was there more to it? Tell us that story, but also tell us some more stuff about the origins of you and music.
So I was born in Darwin, and I think even I was there until I was 7, and from there I just remember always dancing in the living room, and I used to love Yothu Yindi, and at the time Yothu Yindi was the biggest thing in Darwin. This was in the early 90s. And then my mum decided to move to Perth, so we jumped in the car and we drove 7 days down to Perth, and we pulled up on the side of the road, and there was a pile of junk, and there was like a tape there of the Bodyguard, and we played it, put the cassette tape in, and I Always Love You came on. I'm like, wow, those vocals, wow. Yeah, and then we were like hitting the hotel, the motels, and the film clip would come on. I'm like, oh, and it was everywhere at that time. But just sort of growing up from there. My mum, she was a party animal, so I grew up on the 90s R&B and hip hop. But I also listened to like a lot of Van Morrison and Sade and Fleetwood Mac. All of the good stuff that my mum would listen to, pretty much. Yeah.
And was there a point where you thought, this is what I want to pursue? Do you remember that time where it was like, this is what I want to devote my life to?
Yeah, I think I always loved music, and then I don't know at what age, but when I discovered that you can actually make music, I thought it was a natural thing as a child. You just grow up hearing it, but as soon as I know that you can actually write lyrics and melody and put music together, I just knew that it was what I wanted to do. Yeah, because it made me happy, and I realised that music makes everyone like happy, and it moves people, and that's what I wanted to do as an artist as well, was move people, and yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, incredible. Jan, I'll come back to you. Growing up with your father as a writer as well, was that the starting point for you, or did you have your own entry into the music world prior to that, or during that, or in opposition to that, perhaps,
Yeah, probably a little bit of both. I mean, I was very privileged creatively. So my mum is a painter, and my sister's an actor, and my dad's a composer. So it's I'm definitely the most chilled of the bunch. But Dad would come into my room when I was 12 years old and say, hey, there was this CD shop. We lived in St Kilda, and there was this CD store, album record shop in St Kilda on Barclay Street, and it's where you could get all the international imports from. And so he'd come in and say, hey, there's this band called Massive Attack, and this is their first record, or one of their records, called Protection. I remember he gave that to me, and he said, I just think you should listen to this. And my head just blew, and still one of my favourite records of all time. And another time he came in, and this is how cool my dad is. He came in and said, there's this band, I think they're going to blow up. They're called Rage Against the Machine. You should listen to this. I think it's the best sounding rock band since Led Zeppelin. And again, he would walk into my room and find me with my guitar jumping on my bed and say, he's got a very strong Polish accent, but he'd say, if you put some of that energy into practice. So I started to. But I was very much into the visual arts, and when I left high school, I went to the VCA and did a fine arts degree. And I thought that I would be a visual artist. That's what I always kind of imagined all through my childhood. But it was there that I actually met all the people who were studying jazz. And that's when all of these ideas from these records that I loved and the theory that I didn't really know, because Dad and I had this strange relationship where we loved music, but we didn't really spend a lot of time at that point making music with one another. And then when I started kind of voyaging into this kind of deeper sense of harmony, it's when I just became addicted to it. And I started playing gigs with those guys, and then by the third year, long story, but it was just lots of in the right place at the right time. And a friend of mine said, I was in a kind of band, and a guy called Andy Baldwin, who's a producer, I'd been working with him, and I'd shown a lot of interest in the production side, because Dad had a studio at home, and I kind of understood music, how music could be a visual thing. You could move parts around, and at that point, when that was all quite rudimentary, it already started to make sense to me. And so he'd seen that I had a keen interest on it, and said, I'm going to work with this band. They're going to be awesome. Do you want to come and be my assistant? They're called the Cat Empire, and we're going to make their first record, Come to Byron Bay. So I did. And then we made that first record, and that's, when I met all those guys properly, and we all became, we're lifelong friends now, 20 years later. But yeah, that was it. After that, I was like, screw this assistant thing. I'm going to become a producer, and as only like a 19-year-old can be that arrogant. And so then that was it. I was off.
But you had Jackson and Jackson though, didn't you?
Yeah, that was a bit later. Yeah, I was kind of mid-20s by then. Yeah.
And Nicky, maybe I'm not sure whether you're growing up in your family was a similar experience with music around you all the time. I know you mentioned your dad before, and you actually did an album with him of Maltese traditional music.
Songs, yeah.
And I think your siblings are also
Yeah.
musicians as well. So what was the spark for you, and at what point did you know that that's the direction you were taking?
Did it. I started playing drums when I was 6 years old. I don't remember, I didn't have any lessons or anything, but every Wednesday at the school I was at, there was marching drums, because every Monday morning the assembly would happen, and it'd be a marching band, and we'd have to, with bugles and drums and kettle drums and everything. And my brother, who was in grade 5 at the time, and I just started prep, he was the captain, and you had to be grade 4 and above to be in the band. But he told the principal, he said, look, Nicky can actually play, if we can. And she said no, but I kept on sneaking to. So every Monday we'd do the procession around the class, around the school, of this drumming routine, and then would sing God Save the Queen. But every Wednesday, this guy called George Watson used to come and teach us the routine. So my first thing on drums was really was that, and so I understood rhythm and rudiments kind of at a very young age, but didn't really kind of absorb it. And then when my brother started high school, he met these guys, a guitarist and a bass player, and my brother played keyboards, and they formed a band, and they were looking for a drummer, and he said, look, my brother plays drums. He said, but he's only 6. But so I had an audition, and they seemed okay. So that's where I started playing. And then that became the family dance band. The 2 girls started singing, and so I was part of the Maltese community, and so we were like the darlings of the Maltese community. Every time there was a Maltese ball, a wedding, or an engagement, we were the band, because Dad used to do a half-hour.
Very quiet family, the Caruanas.
Oh, yeah. Half-hour.
I played a board game with them once, and it took them 45 minutes just to agree on the rules.
We're sticklers. So Dad used to do a half an hour Maltese spot. His timing was terrible. But he had this he used to do theatre when he was at school, so he had this kind of bravado. It was kind of loud, confident and wrong, But but he knew the Maltese tunes, and when I recorded the album with him, it was actually classic. So he would do things like Lancha Jaya Wachrasera, and instead of coming in there, he'd go Lancha Jaya Wachrasera. Minta sleep, and so he'd add bars left, right, and centre. So when we're playing live, we're going 2, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2. So when I was recording, I had to hit him when to come in. So Lancha Jaya Wachrasera. Dun, 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 dun. So that was hilarious.
Sounds like playing with Bob Dylan.
Yeah, that's when he was like 70. But so we were the family dance band. We used to play all these gigs on weekends, all the balls and everything, because the Maltese community was quite active. And at 14 years old, a singing priest who was huge in Malta came over to Australia, and we recorded an album with him. And we recorded a song called Tislia. And Tislia went to #1 in Malta for 13 weeks, knocked ABBA off the charts, off #1. And all the money that they raised for that went to build the Maltese Community Centre in Parkville, in Victoria. So it was very much a kind of community-based thing. And so I didn't really kind of think, it was just what I did. So most weekends I was, playing and, learning songs. And then at 16... So then we went, that was always the family dance band, but at some point we wanted to do our own songs. Our own songs being, Bob Marley, Doobie Brothers, JJ Cale, Jeff Beck, and just music that wasn't suitable for the Maltese circuit. We actually used to get told off by Dad. I remember he came in once and we were playing disco, and he smashed the plaster wall and went, "No disco!" It was hilarious. But we broke away, and the band was called the Fugitives, only because when we bought the drum kit, there was the Fugitives on the drum kit, and we thought, if you get the drum kit, you get the name, And so we called the band Fugitive Flight, because we still wanted the connection with the Maltese community to come and see us, And this band we started at the time when it was the cover band scene. And the cover band scene in Melbourne and all around Australia was you would play, you'd have residencies in Melbourne, but when you went on tour, you played at one venue for 6 nights and had a night off. And if a touring band came in, you were the support band. So we did a 4-month tour when I was 16 years old. I did year 11 by correspondence. And in that 4 months, I lost my virginity, smoked dope for the first time. A friend of ours died of a heroin overdose, and we were hanging around with drag queens, and I wrote my first song. And the first song was called Hard Work for Nothing. It was about a roadie. So that was 16 years old and being on tour, and that's when I really decided, okay, I've actually got a wage for this. I could do this for a living. And that was really where I decided that, okay, I can see kind of a bit of the Police had just come out. I was just getting into reggae, Madness, the Specials, that whole two-tone thing. I belonged to that, I just felt a real kind of sense of belonging, and that was kind of my seed of where the songs were going to come from. And that was really where the point where I was going to go, okay. And I decided, I needed to learn have a musical instrument, so it was either the keyboard or the guitar. And I used to go camping a lot, and I figured that guitar is going to be the most convenient, So I started learning guitar, just never really had any lessons, but just chords, and like still to this day, I don't really know chords. I just know my shapes, And so there's different shapes that I have, and even when I'm doing stuff with the orchestra, for example, it's like, no, I put the finger here and that over there, and it's that's an E flat 7th, 11th, whatever. I said, no, it's the shape. So that was a real pivotal point of like deciding that that's what I was going to do, and then the other real pivotal point was when I really wanted to record my first album, and realised that at the time, recording in the studio was expensive. It was like, that's normally why you had to get a recording contract, because you had to get the money to record the album and everything. So it was a bit of a, catch-22 situation. So I got a publishing deal. I kind of wrote some songs, and with my first publishing deal, I bought an 8-track recorder, a mixing desk, and I learnt how to record, and then that was my other source of income. And all through bringing up my children, I was able to. I built the studio at the back, and at the time I was able to get $500 a day to record and also play. So a singer-songwriter would come in, I'd play the drums, the guitar, the bass, and they would sing, and that would be my fee, And so you get 4 of those a week or something, and it was enough to raise a family. Yep. So that was they were the 2 kind of pivotal points of songwriting, the value of playing live, and then being able to be self-sufficient, not only recording myself, but the idea of like there's always going to be people that want to record and want to be a star. Everybody, as a musician, you think, wouldn't it be great to have a hit song? Okay, I've got to record the hit song. So I was able to help a lot of people record that. And from that, you develop those skills for your own songwriting and everything. And I think, you would understand this, but a lot of the times, if you just do by yourself, you can kind of disappear into a bit of a rabbit hole, that having another person, even a non-musician, just to kind of go, yeah, I'm not feeling this, that type of thing, and it's a good thing, so I've learned to appreciate that.
Thanks, Nicky. Yeah, I do have questions on collaboration, because it's pretty clear with all of you that you've collaborated quite strongly on lots of different projects and writing. Before I ask those questions, though, Eliza, I read where you were given a piano as a teenager, which started your journey.
Yeah,
just tell us a little bit about that.
I started singing when I was 5, and it's always felt very linked to having a disability. So I started falling over at school when I was 5, and it just happened that a teacher was looking for someone to fill in for another student who decided they didn't want to do it. It was too scary, which it was, doing a singing competition as Stedford. I grew up in Albury-Wodonga. And I was a pretty confident kid, and so I put my hand up and said I really wanted to do that. And I guess as soon as I really started singing as a 5-year-old and won this gold medal, I saw it as like, okay, this is something that is really going to make me feel like I belong. And I think that growing up in a regional town and feeling a bit different because of the way that I walk and having a disability, it was like the thing that really helped me. So I would just sit often with a couple of friends. We'd go into a music space and just sing and play the piano, and it was just a incredible outlet. And it moved me and moved my friends, and I'd get them to sit there and close their eyes, and I'd sing, just anything that I was feeling inside. And then by chance, a family friend passed away, and in their will, they wrote that I was the recipient of a beautiful piano that I still have today and write my songs on. And the day that it came through the door, I sat down and wrote my first real song. And it was about, a breakup, even though I probably hadn't even been through a breakup. It was just that real heartache song, teenage angst. And again, it was just that real feeling of like, this is getting out what needs to come out. And that's really how I've always written my songs, very intuitive, very what's going on inside. My mother said that I couldn't leave home unless I was enrolled in uni. And so I enrolled in a journalism degree, which, has paid off eventually. I've done journalism with the ABC and written a book now. But I basically just didn't go and just constantly kept deferring it every year, and instead created a band that was called Describe Eliza, and we would play pretty much Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday night, SB, Evelyn, I'm trying to think what other venue. What was the one in St Kilda that you'd play at? No, it was the one, anyway, one of the St Kilda venues. Vineyard. The Vineyard. The Vineyard, and then the Evelyn, and just, yeah. and just keep that going, and just the live circuit over and over and over again. But by chance, I then entered a competition where I performed in a theatre, and a person stood up and said to me, I really think your music belongs in TV shows or movies. Like, I think it's very emotive and moving. And it's just that one comment that can really change things. And I just remember thinking, wow, that's a space I really want to move into. And yeah, that's kind of what I've done. I've written for a lot of theatre shows. I've written for a TV show, wrote the score for an ABC Kids show, and had my music used in all different TV when, scenes and people are breaking up and people are falling in love. And that's, I just love that. I love when I get to see the visual side of my music coming to life. And I write really, that's what I like to write, is about my story and about who I am, and that kind of, moving part of who we are.
Yeah, thank you. I've got pages of questions, but we're going to run out of time in a moment. So I'll just get some quick fire answers to a couple of things. So first of all, because people have brought instruments along today, there's going to be some collaboration going on at some point. What is the secret to collaboration, do you think? Nicky, we might start with you.
I just think just be open. Like you, I'm a control freak. I realised I was a control freak and realised that was the thing that was actually holding me back a lot. So just that's where you would normally think, this my idea is strong or whatever type of thing. You really have to get rid of all your ego and just go, anything's possible. Brainstorm. And what let's entertain. A lot of the time you go, after a while it's like, this is actually quite a good idea, or this is actually something I wouldn't have tried. And when I have collaborated, that's the big thing that comes out. It goes, I would never have thought of that. I'm me saying that and the other person saying that too, which, and just an objective opinion. And things actually, I think, fire faster. You kind of go, ding, 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 whereas with yourself you kind of go, but they're kind of like, you get through things faster, I think, if you're collaborating.
Just getting messages about timings. Thank you. Yeah, no, that's great. And Eliza, what about yourself?
For some reason I've realised this more and more, that when I'm in a co-writing session, I generally was lacking confidence and not trusting myself. And just recently I did a really great session with somebody, and I did the opposite. And so I guess just when you do trust yourself and you do trust that you have important things to say, at least, and just believing in yourself, it actually can really turn things around instead of just letting someone take the reins and take control. I think that's what I've learnt lately, is that collaboration is just that. It's actually two people coming together and sharing, and not just one person taking over.
Yeah, sure.
So for me it's been about believing in my ideas and trusting myself and realising that we both have a lot to offer.
Yeah, and Candice?
Yeah, it's just about bringing all of our experiences into a room and just having a conversation at the start to see what connects and how we all fall on like a particular subject and concept, because I think the emotion of the story behind what we want to write, if you can get on that with your collaborators and you all agree that, we've all experienced this, let's write about that. That makes it a lot easier. The rest of this is just about the producer just blocking everything in, and that's what I found over time that helps drive co-write sessions. Yeah,
thank you. And Jan?
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with Nicky, which is that the beauty of music. I mean, like when I was a teenager at school, our school had a band room. You could go there at lunchtime or after school and jam. And I just remember that feeling of playing, and it was sort of like none of us were any good, but together we sounded all right. And that little kind of tingle you got down your spine, and it's like that feeling, I think, is achievable through that kind of collaborative human experience, and harder to do just on your own. Not to say that there aren't merits of just sitting there and working ideas on your own. I mean, like, I think that's really important as well. But it's definitely like that spark of playing with people and making eye contact and hearing what they're bringing to the table. And if it's in a songwriting, composition session, whatever it may be, So just really embracing the idea that you're all there to bring your strengths to the table, and embracing the fact that people think about things differently than you do, and that's why you're there. You're there because if you want to do it just your way, then sit by yourself. But if you open the door to other people, then you've got to be open to their ideas.
And sometimes the process is the best bit, right? Like sometimes the product, kind of the end result, sometimes ruins it. It's
Hope
like,
not. Hope not.
Because,
my first album, I didn't actually believe in it. I was just kind of writing, and then a friend of mine, we were just having a jam, and he goes, "Look, that's I love that. It's really good." He said, "You think you should release that?" I said, "You reckon?" And just that impetus of, it was, not even a friend that I knew for very long, was kind of going, "Oh, maybe it is okay." And then I started doing another one. I kept playing to him, and he was kind of, "No, that's good. No, you've got a style happening here. No, you've got a thing. You're putting that together. You're doing it that particular way." I was like, "Oh, I'm going to record an album." I wouldn't have actually. I didn't think I had the. So that's important. I think just to get that feedback.
My son's in a hardcore band, and he hasn't joined APRA yet. And I say, "You have to join APRA. You got to tell us who wrote the songs." He goes, "We don't care about that, Dad. It's all about the music, and we just have fun." And I said, "Look, one day you're going to release something. You're going to have to decide who wrote it, and you won't remember, and there'll be issues." So when we do our APRA talks, we always talk about the songwriting process and working out the co-writing at an early stage before it gets too tricky down the track. Yeah. And what about with your writing, the process of writing? What's the how do you write? What's the first thing? Do you get an instrument and just write on that? Do words come first, or do you sit down at the computer and something starts? You get a drum machine beat and then you add something to that. Like, I know it's probably different for you do all of those, but what's the most one that you do, Candice? Out of all of those?
Yeah, for me, I guess I've experimented a whole different ways, from starting with voice memos, keeping a diary, and then also, first starting with chords on a guitar or keys, and then the lyrics and melodies sort of comes from that. But I actually, I listen to music first now that inspires me, and I look at the structure first, because for me to not get writer's block is I actually block everything out from verse, chorus, verse, bridge, whatever I want, from analysing it from other music. And then I fit chords within those bars and then lyrics within those bars. So I work with it kind of like on a block state, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I can, from doing that process, I can write a song from start to finish within like an hour. Yeah.
Fantastic. Have you ever had a time when that you, just out of the blue, the song was there? I'll ask this to everyone, and you don't know how it happened? Like it just sort of came out and it's done in like 2 minutes?
No, it's done twice in my life.
Yeah. I know that you often hear writers talk about that. Like sometimes it's so hard. Yeah, and I need a process, but other times it all just happens and there's the finished song.
I have a funny one like that, actually, because I was in the studio recently with a very accomplished musician, and he said, "Last night I had this epiphany, and I rolled over in bed and I recorded it." And he got out his own iPhone. He's like, "Listen to this." And it was like, and we're like, that's not it, mate.
I think, isn't that how Paul McCartney wrote Yesterday or something?
Well, yeah, scrambled eggs. I mean, yeah.
So what about for you, Eliza, the starting point? Is it an instrument or lyrics? Or
I think it's all of it.
All of it,
Yeah. I keep a journal, so I write lyrics. Sometimes I'll just sit at the piano and just something will come out. Sometimes I have where I know what I have to write about. So it might be that, so for instance, I wrote a song for a compilation about a female that I admire. So that was the subject. I think sometimes, it'll just be like in the car and there comes this melody in my head, and so I have to pull over and do a voice memo.
I was just listening to Ed talk about that, and I have the same experience of humming, like humming until you can actually get to somewhere to put down an idea or work out what the chords are. You might be driving or in the shower or something, and
Lately,
and then voice memos are good on your
they
iPhone
are.
to put down ideas on that.
Yeah, lately I've been writing like the title or the hook line first, and that seems to help. Yeah.
And I'll go, Nicky. Yeah.
Yeah. lots of different things. Like speaking about the garage band thing before, I just started with this. There's so many different ways of writing. It's usually, for me, it's a voice memo. I mean, the phone is an amazing thing for not only, a camera, but and a way of communicating. But, I used to carry tape decks around and Zooms and all that type of thing. And in any creative field, sketches, it's all about the seed. It doesn't always get back to the seed of something. And you just, it's a sound, a melody, a thought process. Most of my stuff is just on the guitar, sitting on a balcony somewhere, and just nonsensical, Let's go, whatever. And sometimes there's words in that. Sometimes it's like I've done things where I've just done a whole train of thought. The phrasing has been amazing, but there's no words. So I've had to copy the phrasing and work out words to match what the phrasing was, because it was like it nailed it, whatever I was doing. On the GarageBand thing, there's a drum groove, but there's a note, like, it might be like, and this note, you find out what the note is in the guitar, and that's where it starts. So there's so many different, and the titles before, like Ed Cooper was just him speaking, there was 5 or 6 phrases that I wrote down that are song titles. Just everyday things, even things that, we've just said here, So it's this constant awareness of stuff, but the key word, again, which Ed Cooper said, was discipline. You actually have to put the time in. Every songwriter, worth their salt, saying, sometimes I'd sit in front of the easel, or in front of the computer, or record something and make it. You mean, like, you can't wait for inspiration. If you're dedicated to the craft, put the time in.
Got to turn up. You got to turn up.
You got to turn up. That's it. Yeah.
We've actually run out of time, but we wanted to have a couple of minutes for questions from the audience, if that's okay. So maybe, Narelle, maybe 2 questions we have time for, or 3. We'll see how we go. Yeah, stand up and yell out. Oh, we've got another microphone.
Well, you could use my mic if you want. I can share one. Yeah. Oh, you got COVID. Projection.
Question? Anyone? Don't be shy.
Oh, there's one over here, Narelle.
Where are we? I mean, you don't have to use that if you don't.
Oh, it's okay. You're all really successful as creatives, but, and this is something that I hope that all artists here today will eventually encounter, how do you battle imposter syndrome, one section, when you've become so successful off what you're doing that you start to doubt whether you're good enough?
I don't know if that ever really goes away. I think anyone who is, playing in a pool that they feel is bigger than maybe their abilities always feels, I don't know, that's a weird metaphor, but, I think that it's something that doesn't go away. But it's also something that you have to kind of embrace, like that vulnerability, because everybody that you're working with feels the same way.
Success is relative. What is success? When you say success, what does that mean to you? For me, success is doing what you love doing and making a living from it, number one. So if your thing is doing 3 or 4 gigs a week, playing a set of covers and some originals and everything, and you're making a living, you're putting food in the fridge, you're successful, right? You don't have to have the fame. You don't have to, especially nowadays, the landscape has completely changed. The idea of success is, it's so messed up, I can't even get a read on it anymore, So success is doing what you love, and then there's people that I look up to, and then there's people that actually look up to me thinking, what, so it's all different, it's all relative, if you're a millionaire, but then you've got the trillionaire, and then, so it's really just finding out what success means. If success for you is, having another job, and you just get to play on the weekend and just write songs and not have to be frustrated about not making a living from that, then good on you. That's a beautiful thing, So finding that, it's important. The fame and all that type of thing is actually a distraction, because there's a whole lot of energy and time that kind of, it's kind of nice to be sitting kind of, for me, I don't consider myself successful. I just get as far as like in what people say, you're a success and that type of thing, It's not. I feel personally successful because I'm making a living from understanding that from the musical thing I can do this, this, and this, and I've brought up a family, and I'm making a living from doing that. So you don't need to kind of there's no drama around it, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I'd just like to add, like quickly, like with writing, I used to have that a lot, that feeling a lot, and because every song that you write, you think, okay, this is going to be it. This is going to be my hit.
Classic.
But every song that you write is going to move somebody. So you just keep moving forward yourself. So, you know, you've done the song, okay, let's move on, let's do the next song. Because, you know, the songs that I've released, and I'm like, ick, and I'm just like, oh my God, it's out there. But people will come to me and say, I love that song that you wrote. And I'm like, really? Okay, well, yeah, it did its job. So, yeah.
A lot of frustrations around ambition and that type of thing. Like my last album just released, you know, it's exactly what you're saying. It's incredible because, you know, great video, you know, single, it's all upbeat and everything, record companies behind it and everything. It gets released and it's like, oh, okay, so, you know, didn't really do much. Okay,
What's
so,
next?
well, you know, yeah, got similar. And you kind of, so that's why the landscape's changed so much. You can't get a read on how it used to be. It used to be vinyl, you used to be able to sell it. It was units, you could do it, you know, it's not like that anymore. So it's kind of like, you know, and this is a conversation that I'm constantly having with a lot of people is, what does it all mean? What, you know, when you write your song and you produce a song, where to, you know, the whole streaming thing, like Ed nailed it before, was saying, it's not like, you know, it's not clean anymore. It's like, it's so nebulous and vague, that whole thing. Yeah. Sorry to ramble on.
No, it's been fantastic, and we've learned so much, and thank you all. What a great experience. I'm privileged to be able to be up here talking to these people. Now, we're at the end of it, so I want to thank our panellists, and you're going to see them this afternoon.